phthalates as well up there on the right. You know, those are plasticizers and things to make our plastics more pliable and not brittle and break. So all of these things are completely unintended consequences of our chemistry because we didn't have it in that design phase, in that design criteria at the beginning. So I'm going to do a little plug for the Werner Babcock Institute for Green Chemistry. So where does this come in? Where does this design criteria and this design, green chemistry design, come in? The Werner Babcock Institute is a great example in the U.S. It's the first of its kind that's solely dedicated to green chemistry research. They work directly with companies to design greener alternatives. And they work in all of these different industrial sectors. You'll see alternative energy up there. You'll see cosmetics and personal care products. You'll also see pharmaceuticals. And you'll see some of their core technologies as well, which John mentioned and spoke about yesterday as well. But this is where all of the scientists are solely dedicated in all of these, that design criteria that I brought up there. It's in there right at that very beginning design stage when we're designing these greener alternatives. And so what are some of the tools that we can use, either both at our institute or outside of the institute? Curriculum and training, again, a plug for education. If we can minimize the training that we have to do in industry if we can maximize it at the grade school level and college level, then we can bring much better prepared students into industry. And I'll also just mention Dr. R.K. Sharma from here at the University of Delhi, who's doing some amazing things and working green chemistry right into the curriculum there of a chemist, of an undergraduate student and graduate student right there, right here in India. So some fantastic work that's helping to train some students here. The other tools, research tools for design. And I'll mention a few of these. We had a great talk by Colin Astis yesterday about some hazard or toxicity property guides, and I couldn't come up with a good name for it. I'm sure you have a better name for it, Paul. But it was a fantastic talk about some tools and things that we can look to actually guide how we design our molecules and our materials. And I'll mention those first three, solvent substitutions and reagent guides, and some things that we're doing at the Institute to see how we actually are implementing this at the Institute. So this first one, just the solvent substitution and reagent guides, I'm going to point to some resources. And there's many more of these research tools. I just pulled out a few that have worked for us. This is a great publication out of Green Chemistry Journal. About it's a very simple solvent selection guide, and where it's laid out in a very simple manner to say, green is good and red is bad. So what are the better choices for solvents when you're in a research setting? And then there's the usable in the middle, which are better than some of the undesirable. And it's laid out that the red solvents might have these undesirables, so to say, have what the reason for their undesirability, if that's a word. It could be that it's more toxic, it's carcinogenic, or it also could be that it might be highly flammable. So depending on your industrial process, what your process is going to be, these reasons can be the reasons for the red solvent can mean quite a bit, especially when you're looking at scale-up in manufacturing. So this is put into a simple solvent replacement table, which basically when you are going to the research, when you're in your research lab and going to your research bench, which solvent do you reach for? Which solvent can you look to actually substitute? And these are just some really general guides, and it's a good starting point. It's a starting point that we've used, and we've built upon this as well. But just some results that Pfizer has actually seen because of this. You can see these are pretty drastic results. 50% reduction in chlorinated solvent use across all of their research divisions. So more than 1,600 labs during just 2 years of implementing this throughout their research labs. They pretty much eliminated an ether by this awareness campaign that they had over those same 2 years. And you can see the use of heptane increased versus over hexane and benzene. This is solvent substitution is sort of one of those low-hanging fruits that might be one of the easiest to adopt, but sometimes it can be a little bit more tricky depending on your process. But this is a great resource. And again, this is another one from Pfizer. They have developed these reagent guides where they actually look at, in our synthetic transformations, depending on the reagent that we need, they're looking at 3 criteria. And these are criteria that they've developed, which some of it may or may not work depending on the setting. But wide utility, so can the reagent be used for a variety of different substrates, for different groups and that sort of thing on your molecule? How scalable, the scalability, which is something that we don't often think about in the research labs. Is my process going to be scalable? So, and then the third one is greenness, and they evaluate greenness on these 3 criteria: worker safety, ecotoxicity, and atom economy, since atom economy can be a good indication of how much waste is created in a process. So, again, these are their criteria. And I'll just pull up 2 that are from this. You can see this one, the oxidation of a primary alcohol to an aldehyde. And if you know about oxidations, you can see some of oxidations and reductions both have some of the most hazardous reagents around. So you can see there's some that fall between that scalability and greenness that need to be pulled into the utility, towards wide utility, and there's some that do come up in that middle, although I think that they might not have the best atom economy at this point, but there are some pretty good alternatives there in the middle. And then I'll just mention this one really briefly as well. So an amide formation from acids and amines. And this is, again, usually you're using things such as thionyl chloride, oxyl chloride, and some quite hazardous materials as well. So there's a few that border on that green space in the middle that need to be brought in to be more usable. So some of the work that we've been doing at the Institute, and this is both work with Beyond Benign, the nonprofit, and the Institute. We're calling it Green Chemistry in Practice. So some really summary pages. I pulled out 2 because there are 2 different formats that we have depending on if it's a reagent or a solvent. And what this is, I'll zoom up to the first one. Methylene chloride, this is also an easy one to consider as well. But what we have on these summary pages we have an explanation of the toxicity of the solvent. And most people know these days about the toxicity of methylene chloride, so I don't have to go into that. We then developed these solvent tables with a cross-section of all the different solvents that might be good alternatives, with some properties that we've identified that might be useful in our research labs. And it's going to, and the thing about solvent substitution, which I'm sure you're probably familiar with, is there's many properties that you need to consider depending on if you're doing an extraction or a reaction and that sort of thing. So this helps guide us towards these selections. And let's see, I'll bring up my second example here too, which this is an amide formation, which again, I already brought up the information. So many times you have to go through that acid chloride intermediate in order to make your amide. And so here in our summary slides, what we have is a summary of the actual reaction along with some alternatives. And what we try to do is simplify this and make it useful to the synthetic chemist so that as you're in your research lab and you've got certain functional groups on your molecule, can we actually summarize this here so that they would know which process might be more useful. So we have a boric acid route, which is, I don't know if you remember, but it needs to be pulled into that utility space. It needs to figure out if we can make it more useful for across the sectors. And another one, which is pretty recent from Crabtree, here, this transition metal catalyst. It's a rearrangement. So it's a little bit of a guide and a summary for the synthetic chemist as you're reaching for your reagents and as you're thinking about your synthesis. What are some of the tools and how can you actually design these greener alternatives? So that's just some of the materials that we use at our institute. Going back to my how will green chemistry advance throughout the 21st century. I talked to you about all of these things, along with some tools, education. Some closing thoughts about this last part of the future. You know, the enemy of the excellent. So we have to consider and have to remember that green chemistry alternatives must be excellent. They must be good chemistry, and they will be good chemistry to be adopted, and they must be excellent chemistry. But we can't wait for perfection. We do have to recognize that incrementalism versus perfection. We do have to begin to introduce this, you know, immediately without striving. Well, we are striving for perfection, but we can settle on excellence, I think. I don't even want to use the word settle either. We're not settling. So that technology gap, yes, there still are many alternatives that need to be designed, and that's really where education comes in, training that next generation of scientists and getting them to think right away about solving these problems, because we need it. So of course I'm going to say education is the key. A little bit biased there. So my last closing thought to you all is to really think about how you can make a change, whether it be in your education, helping to work with the local college, local school. Maybe it's, you know, implementing your green chemistry within your industrial setting. But change is going to come. Change will come. And will you be the first to lead it, or will you be following? And so, really, I challenge you to be the first. And so, and I think that's what we're working on here today. Really helping to bring this change. So with that, thank you so much for listening.